Hi guys, my name is Oded, and in this podcast we'll speak about software development in the field of medical device, pharmaceuticals, and healthcare with industry-leading experts. I hope you'll find this content useful. Let's start. Hi, I have the great pleasure to have someone that I admire from afar. Mr. Christian Kaestner, software regulatory expert. Christian, if it's okay, I call you by first name.
Absolutely.
Can you maybe share with the audience that maybe not be familiar with your publications, a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Christian, and no need to be formal in this talk, I think. So I'm very happy to be on the podcast, and I'm always happy to talk about software. So my background, I'm a software developer myself. So that's where I started my career. Worked as a software developer for like 15, 20 years. And then I met a lot of people from what I usually call the dark side, or at that point in time called from the dark side. That's people talking about quality and documentation. I couldn't really understand what it was all about. So since around, I would say 20 years back, I started to get more and more interested in the regulatory and documentation part when it comes to developing medical device software. So that's the short background. And like 10 years ago, I started also to be actively participating in authoring and joining project teams around 62304 and 82304-1. So I've been actively involved in the standard work just because I was curious. I wanted to know more about it. So in a nutshell, that's me. So that's my background.
Perfect. So maybe we will just dive into questions. The first one is one that it's kind of trivial, but I always find it a bit confusing. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about the difference between what is a medical device software and what is a health software, and where do we draw the border?
That's a really good question. I think it all depends on where you look for the definitions. So if you look at the standard IEC 82304-1, it says that health software is more or less everything. So the definition, I know this question beforehand, so I looked up the definition in the standard. So it said, health software is a software intended to be used specifically for managing, maintaining, or improving health of individual persons or the delivery of care. So that's more or less all software in any way connected or used with human beings. And in that standard, health software includes medical device software. So there's no really difference or distinction between whether it's a health software or medical device software. So health software is a, let's say, catch-all name for all types of software. Then whether it is a medical device software is more a regulatory thing. So if you are working within the European Union, you can go to MDR and look at the definition of what is called a medical device. Unlike if you go to another region like US or any other in another place in the world, you can look at what's a regulatory defined as a medical device. So it's perhaps not a black and white answer, but generally speaking, health software is a name for a big bunch of software. And within that bucket of software, you find medical devices. So there are, of course, other definitions as well, where people are trying to make a distinguish between health software and medical device software. But I defer that question really to regulation within each country to be sure whether it's what is what.
Okay, so really look at the definition, the specific regulation, to make sure
Yes.
if it is applicable in your case or not. Okay.
And just a side comment, that's the reason for 82304 to try to embrace health software was just to overcome the challenges, because in some countries a software could be a medical device, in others it might not be. And that's why 82304 aimed for talk about health software and let regulators decide whether it's a medical device software or not. So health software should be to all software within that definition. So improving health of individual persons or the delivery of care.
Excellent.
So, yep.
And I mean, you know, software development, software engineering practice, everything is changing in a rapid pace. You know, it's changing, but it's always stay the same in a way. But there's a lot of changes.
Yeah.
And do you feel that the current regulation and the standards, they are really still meeting the original intent of producing quality, safe software in the way that we are making software in 2022?
I need to be careful with my answer here, I guess. I think both yes and no. Looking at, let's say, regulations, I would say that I think the US regulations or the FDA work is catching up and trying to be on top of things and being modern. When talking about regulation, let's say in Europe, the MDR, I guess a lot of people or many listening to this knows about MDR. And I would say, in my opinion, I think MDR has been an overshoot when it comes to software. So in the past, more or less all software was defined in the lowest class to class one software, class one medical devices. Nowadays, it's merely impossible to classify a medical device software as a class one. I think that's perhaps not the intent of the regulation. So I think the MDR was kind of an overshoot when it comes to classifying medical devices. So regulatory-wise, I think there are more work to do. When looking at standards, we have like 62304. There hasn't been much changes since it was released in 2006. I think the intent is still there. I think the intent is still applicable, but perhaps the language used is kind of outdated because in the last 20 years, there's been so much changes to how software is developed. So I think it would be perhaps appropriate to modernize the wordings in that standard, and perhaps also provide a little bit better guidance in the annexes. For example, let's say invite agile development, which is quite popular today, or I would say many are using that development technology. And it's not easy to understand how 62304 should be applied in an agile development. And I think there could be some more, well, let's say tips and tricks, guidance on how to include that. So perhaps a long talk to a simple question, but I think all in all, I think the regulations are modernized. MDR went a little bit overboard. From the standard side, I think that could be, there is room for improvement and modernization, but I think the intent is still there to develop safe software and focus on safety.
Mm-hmm.
So
just to,
perhaps a long talk.
Yeah, so let me just make sure I understand. First of all, from the side of MDR, you have a kind of concern that since we want to focus on risk-based approach on safety, the fact that more things are now classified as a higher level of medical device, this is maybe you have concern that this can hinder innovation by adding all those, I don't want to say red tape, but all those constraints on the manufacturer.
Yeah, yes, I think that's a good summary, and it's probably a reaction because MDD or Medical Device Directive, yes, I was yes, get the wordings right. MDD was let's say too kind. More or less all software wasn't regulated or was classified as class one. And I guess the regulators wanted to fix that. And when they tried to fix that, they almost removed class one completely. So it's really an overshoot. And that was a sad story. And when talking about MDR, there's also, if you look at the general safety and performance requirements, there are also requirements on single fault safety. And single fault safety and software, it is kind of tricky Because if a software goes down, it goes down. And I do acknowledge that there's a need to tackle that. And that's partly why 6234 is there, to try to be risk mitigation when developing software. But the requirement on single fault safety will probably make the life of software development companies quite challenging. Because how do you prove that a single fault in a software will end up in a safe state? We all have seen the infamous blue screen on a Windows PC, perhaps. That's a kind of single fault, and you can't control the situation any longer. So how to prove that? Because that's a regulatory requirement now in MDR. So that's really it is a challenge for sure, how to tackle that requirement. So I think there's a big need for guidance when it comes to application of MDR and especially SaMD products. We will see what the future will bring, but I think there will be guidance trying perhaps to tune down a couple of those expectations and requirements to make them manageable.
I just have a picture in my mind. I see a small company, a startup, or maybe something in that mindset. They have the CI, CD, continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Everything is running, everything is nice. Now there is an MDR, and they call you and you say stop. Now we have to move to a different way of doing things. Is it something from your experience that company can still maintain their previous behavior of engineering practice of maybe deploying, every day, even if there's some hotfix, and releasing versions maybe every month or something? Is it possible still to maintain?
If you say deploying every day, I would say no. I don't find that really manageable, because deploying in my world means that you release the software to be used to the public, so patients can use the software. And I find that too time consuming, because you basically release the product and there's a lot of administration involved in that. You can automate it a lot, but still, is it worth the pain, I would say, because you would spend a lot of time with it. And I've worked with clients and said, our goal is that we want to be able to release every week. And I think they managed to do that. They didn't do that, but they wanted to be ready to release every week. And if they decided to release, they took the extra step to do the additional documentation required to be regulatory compliant. So I think that's perhaps an approach to take, that you, in your mindset, are release ready on a specific time pace you prefer. And when you decide, yes, we want to release this version, then you take the extra step and do the regulatory additional, let's say, documentation required. But every day, I find it challenging. And I often get the response then, but we are quick in managing feedback from customers.
Yeah.
But the challenge with medical devices is you're not allowed to use the patients as guinea pigs. So you can't take that, you can't say that we are quick and fixing problems when the patient feels there's a problem. That's too late, because you as a manufacturer should be responsible for being pretty sure that this software works as intended. You can't say that we're quick at fixing things. No, that's not the right way to go. So that's a mindset where there's perhaps a conflict. So because I believe the traditional mindset when you're talking CI/CD is that we are very good at fixing problems if they occur. And in the medical device field, well, that's not the right way, because you're not allowed to expose patients to surprises. And so that's where the discussion comes. So every day with a statement, we're good at fixing bugs, that won't fly. So, because you as medical device manufacturer, you must assure that the software works before it hits the patients.
I'll be a bit of devil's advocate here, and I would say that you run a business now, and you have important client, and he calls you up and he says, look, I have this issue when this scenario is happening, and you go to R&D and you find it, and it's very clear what went wrong in the code, and you do the verification, and you're fine, you're feeling very confident with deploying the fix. Is like you said, you will not deploy it just because of the regulatory burden of the documentation. It will not be released the next day and have a happy customer. It will be, sometimes it takes a week or two. And if this is impacting the customer's business, that can be something that is may impact your business as well. And this is not, we're not speaking here about patient safety. There's no concern. So
okay, I can correct myself, and I can build a little bit more on that. I think it's always good to be efficient in your release work. So if you decide to release something tomorrow because of there is perhaps an urgent safety issue or a business issue, there could be cybersecurity vulnerabilities identified. So you need to release a hot fix or something like that. I think that's perfectly fine to be efficient in your release cycle, but to plan that we will deploy every day, and if there are problems, the patient will tell us, and then we fix them. That's the mindset I'm after. Sure. That's not okay. But being efficient in your release work and always say, okay, this is, we can call it a hot fix. We need to get it out tomorrow. Okay, fine. Then we take the cost and do the work. I'm not against that part at all. But the thing, using the patients as your test team is not okay. Because sometimes I get that kind of response when people are talking to me about releasing every day. I say, but since we're good at fixing problems when they occur, then I start considering the patients as the test team and the test lab, and that's not the way we should go. Are you following my line?
Yeah, I'm following completely. The only thing I want to say about this is, like, if you did your work properly and you did a risk assessment, so you identified the areas where it's safety, where it's even security, you identify those, and I think the majority of the defects or the escape defect, the one that are found in the field, they are not related to that safety or security. They are something more about usability, not in a way that can cause some error, just something that's important for the business. And in those cases, it's still you have that heavy lifting of documentation, and it's there that sometimes people they kind of sit back and say, oh, it makes no sense. This is so something. It has no patient issue. Why do we have to wait 2 weeks? Why do I have to annoy the customer? So, but you say it's really about striking the balance.
And to that, have you ever found yourself or any colleagues saying, how did that happen? So you're fixing a bug over there, and then you see a side effect on the other side of the software. I've seen it. I've done it myself. I've heard colleagues. How the heck could that happen? You really don't understand. You haven't changed that part of the software, and for whatever reason, you see side effects somewhere else. I don't know. Perhaps I have bad.
No, you are right. You are right. But this is like it's like for now we found the defect. It's a small fix. We understand it. In theory, because of that argument, which is rightful, we can say, oh, let's do regression tests for everything. But we don't we don't have the resource. We are living in a world with limited resources.
Yeah.
And that's why I say you say we don't use the customer as a piggy tester, or but in a way, in those areas that you identify that they are not risk related, you a little bit use it, because you said, look, even when I released the product, I said those areas, okay, they are medical device, let's say they are the low class in the way that we used to 3 or 4, and something escaped there because I wasn't paying all my attention there, because I knew it was not going to harm anyone, and then I want to fix it quickly, and then I said,
yes. No, but I think it all boils down to when you release a medical device product or version, there is let's say a tax or there's a fee to do that, and that comes with you need to be in regulatory compliance, you need to be in control with the quality management system. So there's a price tag connected to a release. So that's the balance you need to find. And when it comes to what you say, it has nothing to do with safety. That's where I would say 62304 and architecture design comes into play. Because if you are good at your design work and architecture design, you have hopefully, made sure that if you change things in one part, it shouldn't have side effects on something else. And that's also where unit testing, regression testing comes into play, and even automated testing. So it is all about finding a balance and having a good strategy in your design work and trying to make all release work as efficient as possible. So there is no really silver bullet to shoot here, but I think, as I said, my personal experience, releasing every day is to me not worth the cost. I don't see there's, you can talk about risk benefit, you can talk about cost benefit. I don't see the benefit in trying to go down that path. But on a weekly basis, I think it's definitely manageable without killing yourself. And if you need, for whatever reason, release a hot fix, quick fix, you can do that. But again, is it worth the cost? It's a question you need to ask yourself.
Excellent. Okay, so let's say now you go to a company that they are state of the art. They are like Google, Facebook, they have team that created an engineering process, like you said, unit tests, integration tests, everything is automated, everything, they have redundancy, penetration testing, they did it all, they wrote the book. And now they call you because something, they want to use it as a medical device. I don't know, the Apple Watch, they want to use some measurements, and they want to use it as a medical device. How do you, what do you look to leverage their engineering practice and align it with 62304 and say, look, you almost everything you do is really in alignment? What do you look for? You look for comments in the code. You look, I don't know. I'm just throwing. How do you leverage the engineering practice, or do you say no? We have to make it differently?
I would say no, thank you to the job. No, I wouldn't. I would assume that they're. But put it this way, I'm a firm believer that if you're good at software development, you're doing most of the parts of you find in 62304 already. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm firmly, if you are good at software development practices, you're probably even doing more sometimes compared to what's required in the standard of 62304 then. So I believe that's perhaps a no-brainer. But what I would start with probably is to have a discussion with the development team perhaps, and perhaps even teach them about the safety aspects, safety term. Because that's where we're also coming from in the previous discussion about continuous deployment. I think the safety aspect is often missing. And in that discussion, I would definitely not start with explaining to them how many documents they need to write, because then I probably will shoot me in my back, shoot me in the head before I even said a second word. So not at all talk about documentation at this point in time. So I would more have a discussion with the team under the assumption that know how to develop software, have the safety discussion. Because you mentioned as an example, they know about security, cybersecurity, they have penetration testing, they have everything in place. But I do believe they have a lack of understanding of what safety means. So teach them about that, and then ask them what confidence level would they need to have to use the software on their family, on their children, on their wife. Perhaps they hate their wife. I don't know. Yeah. that would be a sad story. But let's go for the children or any other beloved family member. Because I think if you ask people that question, so what confidence level do you need to have before you expose your family members to this software? Then you can start seeing some interesting faces because they really start thinking, what does it mean? Because now you hit the weak spots where it's sensitive. And that's my experience, at least. So having that discussion, and with that in mind, telling them about, okay, we have a regulatory framework. We need to provide evidence to convince the surrounding community that we are doing good stuff. And now we're coming into perhaps discussing what type of evidence do we need. That's where the documentation part comes in place. And I would say, I would like to have these pieces of evidence. Do you perhaps have those somewhere in your repository? Is that something you have in your ticket system? And start pulling out information already available. That's the kind of gap assessment. So if information is available, look at how is it formulated? Can we use it? Can we leverage the information and perhaps put it in the document, or just keep it as is? So, yeah.
Right. So, but still, like, let's say you look at what you need for submission, and you need a detailed design, and you need the SRA, the software requirement from 6 to CO4, and you need the testing documentation.
Yeah.
How do you go and try to start pulling those things from what they have existing? What question do you ask about how to prepare let's say the detailed design? Yeah. So they say, look, we have, I don't know what do they have. Maybe they have some comment in the code. I don't know how do they communicate between each other. Maybe they've got some video. I don't.
Yeah. So let's start with the requirements. So how do you work? How do you know what to do? So that's kind of where the requirements comes from, and that could be many sources. There could be ticket systems. You perhaps have a requirement management system. So with that in mind, so can I get that information in a presentable form? How can I get it to comply with, let's say, document control procedures? So that's from the quality management system, document and record control. So, and I think that's the first step when it comes to requirements. When it comes to detailed design, it's quite frequent anyway that you have some kind of perhaps wiki page where people share information. So I think it's quite common to find some source of information where people are working with this already. So can that be captured in a way that complies with document control requirements? So that's where I'm going to try to see, can we use that? And when it comes to verification, very often people use automated tests, and automated tests, they generate test records. So by looking into the test records already generated, could we improve them? Because usually they don't state clearly pass or fail or test acceptance criteria and things like that. So by a little bit of extra effort, you can probably add information pieces to the test records already generated to make them meaningful. So,
right. And the unit tests as well, and testing, how do you take all those build tests that are gating and make them into a document that you can submit?
Well, that's submit. I think the test outputs, test records are not, the test results are not very often requested, I would say. So what you test, so the test specification might be something. Mm-hmm. On the lowest level, I'm happy to see the test specification actually in a unit test. So that's not then submitted. So we have unit tests. Here's the list of unit tests we do. And I can provide that list. So that's perhaps a little bit of extra effort we need to spend on. But basically trying to keep unit tests close to the code and in the repository. I think that's suffice. So I'm trying to find a balance between what you can keep in the software domain, and when needed. I mean, if you go for submission, you need to perhaps provide requirements. You need to provide when the design is implemented, and how do you verify? That's kind of what you have in trace matrix. And I think all those pieces are there in the digital domain. and you can find script or scripting. That's also a way to go forward, because software engineers are typically very good at scripting things and automating things. So you can ask them, so I want this information, let's say a trace matrix, from requirement to the design to verification, and have a discussion with the team. How can you provide me with this information? Because that's needed, for example, when you go for submission in the US. Or it might change because there's a new software guidance actually where I've taken away the trace matrix. But generally speaking, currently it is required. And ask the team, how can you build this information to me? So whenever you release, can you at the same time build a trace matrix? And sometimes people can do that.
So in a way you say, look, like you build a pipeline for deployment.
Yes.
I want you to build me a compliance pipeline, continuous compliance, that just take those Jira tickets, take those unit tests that you run in the build, and it just produce me those artifacts that I can say, look, that version here, this was the requirement, this was the test, and this is doable. This is not something that is you don't see it ever in the field. It's like companies are able to reach that point.
I think it's doable, and that ties back to the discussion we had previously about continuous delivery. If you work with this, and there are ways to automate the generation of documentation, and in some webinars I've attended, I really recommend people to explore the option to have detailed design in your code, because there are different tools where you can, by commenting things properly, you can provide a detailed design in the code. And there are tools which can help you to extract those comments into a PDF, as an example. And again, we are in a situation then where you can, by your code, you write the detailed design in the code, and if someone wants to read it outside of the code, you can export and extract that into a PDF. It might not look perfect like a fancy Word document or something, but it is there, and it's in the code. And I'm a firm believer that if you keep the detailed design in the code, it's more likely to be updated as well, because that's where people work. So it's a win-win. You ask developers to, while you're at it, your coding, please make sure the commenting is in proper format for being exported, and that's part of perhaps that could be part of your code review, peer reviewing, to make sure that this detailed design is there, it's understandable by others. And all this makes things flow in a much easier way. And you're not asked, please write a detailed design document in Word, and it might be updated every second year, or perhaps it's mostly outdated and no one wants to read it because they know it's outdated. Then it's much better to have this information where it happens. So there are different ways to work with this, and this would be a long speech.
It's such a genius advice, because it's really, we know how different is the development cycle, and then I don't want to call it the paper cycle.
Yes,
but this is really dismantling the issue, because you don't, because this is a document that the developers need to maintain, the detailed designs of the software. And when you say to them, go to some Word document and update it, you lost before you began.
Please.
No. So the great in this advice is you say, okay, I know that document maybe will not be the most beautiful document, like I created it in Word and I reviewed it and I looked at all the diagrams are perfect, but it will be much more part of the life cycle of developing the features. And the code reviews and the team leaders will be involved because they check in the code and they do the review for the code. So it's such a much more suitable solution. And you say it's still compliant. So that's a very strong advice.
Yeah, I don't see why it shouldn't be compliant, because again, 62304, I think it's specifically for Class C. If you're looking for detailed design, I still think it's good practice when working with software development to have a detailed design described in the software, and the requirement is to have a detailed design. So if you in your software development procedure said that's what we keep in the code, in the repository, And okay, then people could ask, has it been reviewed and approved? Yeah, what do you think a peer review is? So it's then the code and the comments and the detail design is actually reviewed. But when you decide to commit it back to repository or the domain or whatever you would like to call it, that's the kind of approval stage. So you say, yep, this is approved to go into production, and you have approved your detail design as well. So it's, so there are ways to explore this. And I think I worked with a guy and said, Christian, when you're talking about documentation, it sounds like you're programming. But I would say kind of, because if you have the mindset when looking at software documentation, and you said build a pipeline for compliance documentation, you can do that. So there are really many things to explore and options you can use to try to make this as efficient as possible. So that's really my advice. Look at what you have, explore the options to extract the information in a meaningful way, and make them presentable. So that should be readable outside of the software domain, perhaps if you want to do submission. But if it's clearly stated in your procedures, this is the way we work. We keep track of information, we review and improve together with the software development cycle. That's the way we work with it. And if for whatever reason someone would like to look at the information outside of the repository world, well, here's a PDF export. But by the way, that's just a copy. So that's not the formal document, because the formal information is in the repository together with the source code.
Now, I have to take you on that question, because this is such a good stuff. So like what I experience, okay, so you have those ALM tools like Jira, like TFS, or DevOps is called now, that, you know, they have the tickets there that they maybe even write the requirement, and they write the test, and they have the traceability. And then what I usually see is that even in the more advanced companies, they export it to a Word document, and then they upload it to a document management system where it goes through signatures and like a formal documentation that this will be the one that will be presented in an audit or like sent for submission. But you kind of say I don't even like that solution. I want you to be in a way only in the ALM, and just be able to provide snapshots of what's going on in the ALM. So is there any challenge that these are not, I would say, real documents?
Yeah. How to answer that in the best way? Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are. So the challenges mainly comes from ISO 3485. So you have computer software validation. So if you decide to use tools for a specific purpose, you need to make sure that validated for those purposes. So that's a price tag you need to pay. So if you say an ALM tool, if you want to use it as the document repository, you need to look at, so okay, document controller, what do we need? We need review and approve, yes. We need to make sure that whenever we say this is a document with a specific version, can you trace it back? Can you find that in the ALM tool? So there are a couple of things you need to make sure you have evidence to show, yep, the tool can provide us with this type of information, and we have validated the tool for that use. So that, I would say, that's the price tag you need to pay or have to pay. And of course, you need to make sure the tool is really capable of providing these capabilities, because if it isn't, perhaps it's the wrong tool, or perhaps you need to configure it differently to provide these features. But in general, I think it is doable. And of course, yep, it comes with a cost. But if you compare with the cost it takes for every release, you said you need to export it from, let's say, Jira, and you need to put it into document, do some formatting, and upload it to another document management system. If you do that a couple of times, 5-10 times, you will probably thank me for going down the route instead of and validating the tool for taking care of all this stuff instead. So there's a, you could say it's a kind of front-loading strategy. So if you decide to use tools for a couple of these things, you need to invest in basic software validation of the tools used in your quality management system. And to elaborate a little bit more on this, if you look at the software in a repository, I guess no one has ever asked you about, do you trust the repository? So no one really I haven't seen people asking, or I haven't never got that question. But if you think about it, the repository is really, if that fails, you will build the incorrect software. And so the repository or the tools, if you, let's say, use Git or another tool, if that fails, you will build a software consisting of wrong files, wrong versions of files. So whatever tools you use for controlling your software source code, it is really capable of keeping track of versions and baselining things. So we have strong tools and are capable of doing a lot, probably a lot more than regular document control systems. So you have really powerful tools at hand. You just need to dare to use them to their full capacity and explore the options you have when developing software. So
beautiful.
That's my take.
Excellent. Before we wrap in, I want to ask you just your thoughts. You described it a little bit at the beginning, but still, from your perspective, when you look at 62304, is there anything missing now in 2022? Because the world knows recent updates, and also you discuss Agile, and with this familiar that with the TIR 45 that describe Agile, but it's also very old. It's already 10 years old. Yes. So do we need something? Do we need some kind of a refresh version of everything? Do you see a gap?
There was an attempt or try to release edition 2 of 62304. Unfortunately, that failed after many years of work. But honestly speaking, there weren't much changes in edition 2. So the big thing with the intent of edition 2 was to move from medical device software to health software. That was the main thing, really. And that failed mainly because there was, I would say, it ended up with a conflict between the regulated software and the non-regulated software. So if you want to convince someone I need to be careful again with the wordings, but kind of a lot of people struggle with complying with standards that don't like standards, honestly speaking. So why should someone working with a health software, non-regulated, why should I even look at the standard? So you could really discuss, is there a need to include non-regulated software in the 62304? At the end of the day, it was decided to include non-regulated software, but it ended up in a discussion because the two domains were not really in alignment. So if you're working with regulatory from the regulated side, you do have an expectation of risk management like 4971 and all that stuff that comes with that. But if you are non-regulated, you have never heard about risk management. And trying to satisfy both needs in the same document ended up in really mission impossible, I would say. So that's basically why edition 2 failed, because it was really, really hard to end up with a compromise. And as time went by, there were more and more additions. So you could call it scoop creep. It was really, people asked for more and more and more. And I think the last round of comments, it was like 100 pages of comments and suggestions. The project team just said, it's out of control. There's no way to get this job done. So back to your question, is there room for improvement? Yes, I think that's my personal opinion. I would like to change the scope of 62304 to move from injury, because if you look at software safety classification, it talks about injury and not harm. And personally, I think it would be meaningful to align with risk management in general, to let the software safety classification work on harm and not only injury. And that's probably not a very popular suggestion, because that means that many devices need to reclassify the software safety classification. But I think in the long run, it would be meaningful to be aligned with 49771. Because today, you could say that if you in your risk management file see that I have risks which are with high risk of harm, but not injury. You can burn down the house, you can pollute the lake, you can, well, really do a lot of harm, but it's not causing injury.
That's also resonate a bit with or maybe cybersecurity threats, or not really?
Exactly. So if there's a high cybersecurity risk and people could steal all patient data, is that an injury? Well, you could argue it's a psychological injury, perhaps, but really injury. Well, so I think by moving to harm, you would embrace, as you said, cybersecurity. So the software safety classification would be higher if you have high cybersecurity risk. It would be higher if there's a risk of, well, let's say, killing all the elks in Sweden. We have elks. Oh, I mean, that's not injury to patients, but it would be quite a sad story, for at least for tourism. So I think it wouldn't be popular change, but in my personal opinion, I think it would be a better reflection of where we are today. Because right now, even if you have high cybersecurity risk, you would get away with a Class A classification in the software. And is that right? I don't think so. More changes, I think that could be or improved. We're getting back to continuous integration and continuous delivery. The version existing today of 62304 is quite waterfallish. It's perhaps the best way to describe the content and the requirements. But I think that perhaps there could be some more enlightenment when it comes to regression testing, releasing at a higher pace. Because today, when you read the standard, it looks like perhaps you release once a year. Yeah. And I think there's a strong desire to release more frequently. You could say that. Perhaps not weekly, but if people could release once a month, I think many would be happy. Yeah. It is possible already with existing text, but I think some more guidance, perhaps in the annexes, to provide people with a little bit more help. And that comes to the next thing I would love to see in 6234. It is better annexes. Mm-hmm. So trying to provide some more guidances. That was also something that was prepared in addition to. That was an annex on how to do the software safety classification. What's the meaning behind it? There was an explanation trying to explain the intent, because that's a very frequent discussed topic. So that was an annex in addition to trying to explain the way to go forward with the classification. So some more explaining annexes. So in a nutshell, I would say move from injury to harm, trying to provide some more guidance when it comes to regression testing and more frequent releases. And that might be in explanatory annexes. So that's my take. Others in the project team might think completely different. So, yeah.
Excellent. Maybe you can share with the audience if they have any question or how they can follow your publications, where they can look for information. I know you've produced fantastic material. For me, they helped a lot.
Thanks. I'm happy to hear that. So first of all, I would recommend you to find medicaldevicehq.com. So that's both a website. You can find Medical Device HQ on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So I'm a trainer providing 62304 medical device software course @medicaldevice.hq. So that's one way to go. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn. So you find me at Christian Kaestner. Perhaps you could provide a link. I don't know if that's possible. Then you can follow me on LinkedIn. I try to participate in webinars. I try to share knowledge on YouTube, the Medical Device HQ channel. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss software, as you probably already understand. I like the topic. And I'm also a lazy guy, so I try to find my ways out of things without killing myself with documentation, because I hate it. But I still want to be compliant with safe software.